Hi, welcome back to my channel. I just wanted to share something today with you about this building of the third temple and some of the people who are involved in it. In another video, I talked about David Sheen, who exposed a lot of the Kahanist movement and their violence towards others. And if you go back to that video or whatever, I can't tell you where it is exactly, but he was exposing some of the Sanhedrin members. He's the one that recorded the Sanhedrin saying that certain people should be eliminated and things like that. So that's why I thought it was really interesting that this has to do with the Kahanist activities, and it's a certain movement within Israel. But this is about the GOP's plan to build the third temple. Republicans are working with Kahanist activists to advance a violent vision of Jewish control over Jerusalem's holy sites. And this was written October 7th, 2022 by Corey Sherman. And it has a lot of detailed information that we need to know and be aware of. On April 15th, 2022, some of these Israelis went to the Al-Aqsa and mosque and compound in Jerusalem, and police with rubber-coated steel bullets subdued them with billy clubs. Over 150 were treated, and over 300 Palestinians had been arrested. The assault, as a response to Palestinians blocking Jews from entering the compound amid rumors that hardline Jewish activists plan to perform a Passover sacrifice at the site. Indeed, for weeks on the run-up to Passover, the right-wing religious group B'Yadenu, In Our Hands, part of what's known in Israel as the Temple Movement, had been planning and publicizing mass ascents to the hilltop compound, sometimes referred to as the Holy Esplanade. When the Israeli government temporarily closed the Esplanade to Jewish worshippers on April 25th in an attempt to prevent further violence, B'Yadenu called the new policy a capitulation to Palestinian terrorism. The policy was lifted in early May, and B'Yadenu soon organized more Jewish ascents to the site. On May 29th, when tens of thousands of armed settlers stormed the Old City for Jerusalem Day, chanting "Death to Arabs," calling for the burning of Palestinian villages, and attacking journalists, thousands entered Al-Aqsa, and B'Yadenu celebrated the move. On August 7th, which this year was Tish B'Av, the day that marks the destruction of the Jewish temples, Temple Mount groups rallied more than 2,000 Jews for another ascent. In all of these cases, Jews who entered the Esplanade were joined by police who accompanied Jewish visitors to ensure that they don't violate the policies set by the Jordanian Waqf, religious endowment that administrates the site, which state that non-Muslims are not permitted to pray there. But in recent years, Jews have visited the Esplanade in ever greater numbers and prayed in full view of police, who routinely coordinate directly with the Temple Movement to promote Jewish access for tours and quiet prayer. The Jewish worshippers who flooded the Esplanade on Tish B'Av, for example, repeatedly assured police, we'll be quiet, according to reports, before continuing to worship visibly, audibly, and in unison. The Temple Movement, of which B'Yadenu is a part, has its roots in Kahanaism. The Jewish fascist movement, founded by Brooklyn-born Rabbi Meir Kahane in the 1960s. In the early 70s, Kahane created an Israeli political party, Koch, which led a transitional campaign of violence in an effort to provoke the voluntary and forced transfer of Palestinians from Israel, Palestine, and advocated for the establishment of a theocratic ethno-state. Though Israel banned Koch in 1984, publicly available tax filings show that the original party's infrastructure has been reconstituted in a collection of Temple Movement affiliated nonprofits founded and run by Kahanist luminaries, and Israeli researchers and organizers have documented some ties among Kahanist groups and between Kahanist groups and the Temple Movement. Jewish Currents review of the Israeli tax filings identified a larger number of affiliated groups, including some that register nonprofits in the United States. A new Kahanist party, Otzma Yehudit, has already taken Koch's place in the Knesset. The Kahanist movement is far from being dead in Israel, said Aviv Tadersky, a researcher with Ir Amin, which monitors human rights violations in Jerusalem. It's the strongest it ever was. The Temple Movement's influence, once largely limited to the most extreme settler groups in Hebron and Jerusalem, has been on the rise since 2010, the same year that the U.S. voters gave the GOP control over the House of Representatives. Since then, Republicans traveling in Israel have repeatedly visited Al-Aqsa with the Temple Movement escorts. A Jewish Currents review of travel filings with the House Ethics Committee revealed that Ohio Representative Jim Jordan has met with Kahanists on more occasions than any other member of Congress, sitting down with them on 4 separate trips to Israel in 2011, 2013, 2015, and 2020. In all, more than 40 Republicans, including Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, former North Carolina Representative Mark Meadows, and following his time in office, former Vice President Pence, have met with Kahanists since 2011 in Hebron and near Nablus, as well as Jerusalem. And many of these meetings occurred as part of privately sponsored congressional delegations to Israel that were organized and funded by Christian Zionist groups, including the United States Israel Education Association and Proclaiming Justice to the Nations. Under House rules, lawmakers are permitted to participate in privately sponsored trips like those arranged by Christian Zionist groups, and members of Congress are under no obligation to notify the State Department when traveling on such junkets. The Temple Movement's efforts are aimed at accomplishing a single symbolically important piece of the Kahanist project. Its various organizations seek, per movement founder Israel Ariel, to flatten Al-Aqsa, the hilltop mosque and compound in Jerusalem's Old City that is home to Islam's third holiest site. Now, some say that that's just propaganda, so that they don't want to flatten it, they want to build on an area that's open. But Palestinians, Al-Aqsa signifies their unbroken historical presence in Jerusalem. But the site is also the former location of Solomon's Temple, the holiest in Judaism. And since Israel occupied East Jerusalem in 1967, religious Zionists have sought to upend the policies put in place under Ottoman rule nearly 200 years ago and maintained today by the Waqf that bar non-Muslims from praying on the esplanade, though anyone may access the esplanade during visiting hours. The goal of the Temple Movement is not only to abrogate this status quo arrangement in which the Waqf controls the esplanade, but ultimately to destroy Al-Aqsa and Haram al-Sharif, the compound's most sacred sanctuary, and rebuild the Jewish Holy Temple in their place. I don't think that's what they're planning to do, though. But Temple Movement groups have already drawn up basic blueprints. The movement's GOP allies have publicly amplified a sanctified version of the goals, claiming that the temple movement's aim is simply to end religious discrimination against Jews and give them prayer rights at Al-Aqsa. In 2014, after DeSantis and Maryland Representative Andy Harris entered the Esplanade with members of the Temple Institute in secret, concealing their identities as congressmen, Harris put out a video decrying the discrimination against Jews above any other religion at the Esplanade. In 2020, when the Trump administration unveiled its so-called peace plan for Israel-Palestine, it purported to affirm U.S. support for the status quo, but also included the position that people of every faith should be permitted to pray on the Temple Mount. At any event with right-wing pundit Ben Shapiro, Trump's former ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, appeared to take a harder line when Shapiro told the audience that Jews should build a synagogue on Har Habayit, the Hebrew name for the Temple Mount. Friedman signaled his support of the idea, responding, "I said that once, and I started a riot when I was ambassador, so I'm not going to say it again." A senior official who served under Obama and requested to keep his identity hidden to speak candidly about sensitive foreign policy issues told Jewish Currents that Republicans with ties to the Temple Mount represented a growing faction within the party that was actively trying to cultivate a different approach to what had been a real bipartisan consensus on Israel-Palestine. For many decades, a negotiated two-state solution, and their approach would withdraw support for a Palestinian state, endorse Israeli annexation of the West Bank, and advocate ceding total control of all holy sites to Israel. During the Obama years, GOP efforts in support of those aims amounted to a shadow foreign policy that directly challenged the executive branch's goals. Under Trump, Friedman gave this faction official sanction by joining GOP congressmen when they traveled on junkets to Israel funded by Christian Zionist groups, meeting Kahanists and Israeli cabinet members in turn. In Israel, the Kahanist movement has long been a potent but marginal political force, with U.S. legislators amplifying the Temple movement's demands. The Kahanist violent vision is moving into the mainstream. We saw people whose stated goal was to destroy Al-Aqsa and replace it with a third temple. As extremists said, the former Obama official, the officials saw a possibility that the Temple movement would exacerbate tensions and instigate danger by voicing their views, and more so if they ever made any attempt to even, or partial, to carry them out. The current access policies at Al-Aqsa trace back to an 1852 decree by the Ottoman Sultan Abdul Majid, though the decree specified that only Muslims could pray at the Esplanade, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Haram al-Sharif, or Noble Sanctuary. It permitted anyone to gain entrance by paying a small fee to the Waqf. This policy, often referred to as the status quo, was incorporated into the Treaty of Berlin in 1878 following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and formally accepted in 1929 by the British Mandate. Even after Israel reoccupied East Jerusalem in 1967, the agreement remained largely intact until 2003, albeit with a notable exception: the 2000 incursion into the site by then opposition leader Ariel Sharon, accompanied by armed security forces, which helped spark the Second Intifada. Nevertheless, in 2003, Israel unilaterally granted access to visitors through a gate in the Jewish quarter, infringing on the Jordanian Waqf's control Today, Israeli border police stand at every gate in the compound and can limit entry to Al-Aqsa and Haram al-Sharif. This unilateral change is why Palestinians refer to visit by settlers as incursions, explained Mansour Marjarik, the international advocacy officer at the Community Action Center at Al-Quds University. And under the status quo, the Waqf is meant to control access to the site, not the Israelis. And thus, for 2 decades, there has been a continuous breach of the status quo. Evicting Muslims from Al-Aqsa was one prong of the Koch Party's genocidal platform, and the Temple movement has carried it forward. Even after its party's banning, the Temple movement began in earnest in 1983 when Ariel, then the highest-ranking Koch Party member after Kahana, attempted to bore a tunnel beneath Al-Aqsa in an effort to physically seize the site. Israeli police arrested Ariel, who explained in a 2007 interview that he began planning the creation of what would become the Temple Institute during his detention. Rather than wage violence in the open, he decided the Temple Institute would use research and advocacy to influence public opinion, ultimately forcing the Israeli government to claim the site and rebuild the Jewish Holy Temple. And since the banning of the Koch Party, Ariel's Temple Institute has become the Kahanist movement's organizational fulcrum and publicity arm. Its reach is international. Americans can claim tax deductions by donating to Jerusalem Lights, a 501c3 registered in Texas that is closely associated with the Temple Institute. The Institute presents what Tatarsky refers to as the movement's friendly face, arguing that the movement seeks only prayer rights for Jews at the Holy Esplanade. The Temple Institute maintains a veneer of legitimacy in part due to its association with Yehuda Glick, an American-born rabbi who served as a member of Knesset for the right-wing Likud party. Glick rarely leads with his Kahanist bona fides, preferring to focus on what he calls the movement's human rights campaign for Jewish prayer rights. But while serving in the Knesset, he memorialized Kahana at a Jewish Defense League event in 2016. The Temple Institute also shares a board member, the rabbi and activist Shimshon Elboim, with Yeshivat Har Habayit, or Temple Mount Yeshiva, run by Israel's most prominent Kahanist militant, Bentzi Gopstein. According to a post on Yeshiva Har Habayit's website, Glick helped Ariel and Gopstein plan the single largest temple movement incursion into Al-Aqsa to date, which occurred in August of 2017. The movement's aims for the site and for Jerusalem as a whole involve replicating the example of the West Bank city of Hebron, where the site, known to Muslims as the Ibrahimi Mosque and to Jews as the Tomb of the Patriarchs, has been divided into one side for each faith, both accessible only via an Israeli military checkpoint. And this regime of separation is not limited to the religious site. Military checkpoints in the heart of the city itself prevent Palestinians from accessing major thoroughfares that border Jewish settlement. Hebron is an apartheid city, said Inez Abdel Rezek, an analyst with the Palestinian think tank Al-Shabaka. And there is apartheid in the Ibrahimi Mosque. These policies, Abdel Rezek noted, have driven Palestinians out of the city, effectively depopulating parts of Hebron. The Temple movement explicitly says that they want to arrive at a situation at the Temple Mount where there are times for Jews to pray alone, times for Muslims to pray alone, and maybe even a special split, said Tatarsky. They say it's working at the Tomb of the Patriarchs, and it should be this way at the Temple Mount too. When leaders of the movement bring members of Congress to Al-Aqsa, they appear to push a similar narrative. In 2018, for example, Chaim Richman, the Temple Institute's former international director, escorted West Virginia Representative David McKinley and then Colorado Representative Scott Tipton on a tour of Al-Aqsa as part of a trip sponsored by the Christian Zionist organization Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, which pursues complete Jewish control in Israel based on the belief that it will bring about the end of days and the second coming of Jesus Christ. And though the Jewish activists don't share this theological endgame, their aims align with those of the Christian Zionists in the immediate term. On the tour, Avi Abello, an American-born settler who recorded the excursion and posted the video to his Facebook page, and who also works with Beadenu, explained that the Temple Institute's strategy was to generate the awareness necessary to prepare the Jewish people to be ready to then declare sovereignty over Al-Aqsa. During the same tour, the congressman attempted to take an olive branch from Haram al-Sharif, a violation of the Waqf's policy preventing visitors from removing anything from the sanctuary, and were detained by Waqf guards and police. The Jerusalem Post published a clip in which Abello interviewed the congressman about the experience. Tipton called it ironic that Muslims have got a problem with the olive branch, a symbol of peace, as we talked about. McKinley said that he would raise the issue of religious discrimination at Al-Aqsa with Netanyahu. Jordan first visited Al-Aqsa in 2011 and 2013, but his itineraries do not specify a local host. On those trips, however, he met with Simcha Hakbam, a self-proclaimed disciple of Kahana who has reportedly defended Baruch Goldstein, an American-born Kahana settler who killed dozens of Palestinians at the Ibrahimi Mosque in 1994. Also in 2011, alongside Texas Representative Louis Gohmert, Jordan met with Kahana's relative David Ha-Ivri, who has been arrested for celebrating the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. According to Ethics Committee's filings, he planned and then canceled a tour of Al-Aqsa with the Temple Institute's Richmond in 2015. But was able to tour the Esplanade with the Temple Movement 5 years later in 2020. Glick was his guide that day, and Abello's nonprofit, registered in New York, paid for the trip. Before entering the site, Glick explained to Jordan and Louisiana Representative Mike Johnson that while they visited the site, we will be praying the whole time. Jordan followed Glick's instructions, explaining in a follow-up interview with Abello that he prayed for his family and for Israel and for the U.S. Jordan noted that his wife, who was also present for the tour, prayed throughout the visit as well, and added that she wanted to move to Israel. Johnson, an evangelical minister, described his tour of Israel as the fulfillment of a biblical prophecy and argued that the status quo at the Esplanade was a jarring example of the restriction of Jews and Christians' freedom of expression and worship. Abello, Jordan, and Johnson linked the agreement that governs the Esplanade to the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, BDS movement, and to what they described as the radical left attempts to silence conservative campus speech and indoctrinate students in the U.S. Should the GOP return to power, the Temple Movement's allies in Congress will be in an even better position to continue chipping away at the diplomatic consensus to the benefit of the political fringe. Although the House can't unilaterally usher in the changes that the Temple Movement demands, Republican leaders like Johnson could, for example, pass congressional resolution calling on the U.S. to revoke its support for the status quo at Al-Aqsa, or condition congressional appropriations on such moves. And these would represent a challenge to President Biden, who has said that he supports a Palestinian state, though his administration has made no effort to start talks between Israelis and Palestinians. If nothing else, the GOP could use such measures to put the temple movement's vision into wider circulation, just as both chambers of the U.S. Congress in 1995 overwhelmingly passed a resolution to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem decades before Trump actually did so. The temple movement knows how to build power, Tatarsky said. Evangelicals and congressmen provide the movement with access to funding and political support, and both sides seek total Jewish sovereignty in the area, if for different reasons, he said. Both groups are using each other for their own goals. And remember, when David Sheen recorded that recording within the Sanhedrin group that is Antichrist spirit, they're anti-Jesus, anti-Yeshua, and they wanted to pass a bill to remove his name out of all of Israel, out of people's emails. They won't allow Christians to proselytize and so on. David Sheen had, recorded the Sanhedrin saying these awful things about destroying certain people that didn't comply, and including with the Noahide laws, and including certain people that were in their way. And I showed you a clip of Rabbi Richman telling a Noahide convert that was a Gentile that he thinks is stupid. And rightfully so, because Rabbi Richman said in that clip, "You worship one Jew. That's wrong. You should worship all of us because we all pay for your sins every day." And I was like, whoa, that is an unreal statement. And now I could see how when the Sanhedrin places the king upon the throne and they hand him the gifted crown, that when the king goes there, it's the white horse that announces his arrival. A trumpeter comes out on a white horse to announce, and King Charles III has the white horse that does this. And they will give him a crown as their king, as a gift. And that's when the white horse rider comes out to announce that they have proclaimed him their king, which denounces Jesus as king, which causes the true heir to open the first seal. So this is why the white horse rider, the horses have not ridden yet for the tribulation. And when they give him this crown and make him their king, that's when all hell is going to break loose, because they will have denounced the King of Kings, Yeshua, as their true Messiah and King. And they also believe with the Sanhedrin, they're the ones that appoint the king, by the way, and they also believe that the Messiah is, in fact, a king. So there you have it all together. And this Kahanist movement is talked about by David Sheen on a regular basis, and some of the violence that they've done. So it's important to know these things so that we're not deceived into siding with a group that really doesn't have our back and doesn't love us as Christians. They come here and they give speeches from the Sanhedrin members. Rabbi Richman's come here and given speeches, and I had no idea he thought like that. So we need to be aware of these things and be aware of the fact that they are helping them to get the third temple built. And that's why they put Trump on the coin. The Sanhedrin commissioned the coin with Trump's face on it in the third temple, and it says, he commissioned me to build him a house. And so the person who's going to be the Antichrist is going to be a king Messiah, a replacement who sits in the place of Yeshua. It'll be a king that they select and give a crown to as a gift. The Sanhedrin commissioned a crown to be made already that's gold and a Torah scroll, and they will give it to him when he comes to Jerusalem. And so that's one of the things we need to be watching for, because it's going to come sometime soon. So this is all I had to say today. Thanks for listening. Thank you for supporting my channel if you can. It's really needed and greatly appreciated. And I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Shalom for now.